What's up, PLO Order? This time on the video, we are going to figure out the strategy on 774 single suited flop versus aggressive cbetter. And the situation we're going to figure out today and use is the flop is 774 single suited, single raised pot heads up, and pre-flop I used a simulation where there's no font equity when we 3-bet to the original raiser, which is 99% true on small stakes. If someone opens, they are not folding to 3-bets no matter what the hand is. So the pre-flop ranges are slightly different than you might see on PLO Visions or other solver sims. Also, when we are out of position, we don't have a donking range. This is often true on the small stakes too. So all we have to do is figure out the check raising range. We don't have a donking range. Now, what happens with this is that the c-betting frequency of the player in position is going to be different than you might see on other solver sims, because they assume opponent has a donking range, which means their checking range is stronger, less c-betting. So if you wonder why the numbers are a bit different than on PLO Vision or some other solver simulations, that's the reason. And of course, we're using 3.5% rate as this is the small stakes video. And we have two situations today, not just one, but two. First one is big blind versus button, where we are on the big blind out of position. So the aggressive player is the one who opened from the button. We call from the big blind and the flop is 774. And the opponent is going to bet 80% of times. That's a big c-betting frequency. But some players do like to bet those paired boards with almost the whole range on heads-up situations. And to be honest, I've done it. Because versus a lot of players, it's very profitable to just fire all of your air. And the other situation is button versus middle position, where we are in the button and middle position open, so we are in position. We have two situations, out of position, in position, so we can compare those one. So the flop is 774. Now, first, let's look at some solver strategies. First one is normal situation. Normal ranges, normal balance, normal players. So on 774, when button opens and big blind checks, remember no donking, then button is going to c-bet half a pot around 35% of times. And when he does, then the big blind who checked his whole range is going to fold slightly over 40% of his range, so he's defending almost 60% of his hands, and he's calling 50% and raising only 9%. And this means that on average, when you bet half a pot on 774, you should have around 40% folding equity. And that is quite right. The thing is that when you bet half a pot, you only need 33. So if opponent folds 42%, you print money. So that's why it's so profitable to bet half a pot even with your whole range. So this is starting point. This is solver strategy. Now, let's say the opponent c-bets 80%. Same flop. And now, this is the button action. Button bets 80%. And how big blind is going to react to that one? 35% folds only. It was around 41 on the previous one, so slightly less folding. The funny thing is that actually the defending range doesn't change that much. It goes from 60 to 65. So we don't start to play crappy hands. That's a big surprise for me. It doesn't bluff with some of this folding range. It calls 39 and just raises 26% of times. So when someone c-bets 80%, someone likes to raise 26% of times, which is quite a lot. But the thing is that it still folds 35%, which is pretty even-ish. So even versus 35% folding range, c-betting 80% is not that bad of a strategy if you don't know anything else to do. But we can see normally this was a 9% raise, now it's 26. So what happens is Sommer, of course, likes to raise a bit more, but the overall defending frequency doesn't change that much. Now, if you have an aggressive player who c-bets 80% on average, especially on these boards, then his c-betting range might be different than what Sommer c-bets here, because Sommer is always trying to find the best possible balance. Even if we force the Sommer to c-bet 80%, still it tries to find balance. So he's checking some of his total air and c-betting some of his total air. So it's not like he c-bets all of his air and then checks hands that might have some value, which might be the case in reality. But we get a pretty good idea how Sommer fights aggression, because aggression is often the hardest thing to deal on the tables. So normally 9% raising range versus Aggro out of position. We check raise 26. So what do we check raise? And that's the interesting part. The normal 9% range is a bit of mix of everything. I mean, even the full houses are like 50-50, and I tried to search for some kind of patterns, but all kinds of hand classes, blockers, flush draws, trips, full houses, overpairs, straight draws, wraps, all kinds of hands. It was pretty of mix. Some of them are raised, some of them are called. So it was really hard to find any easy tendencies and patterns. So the normal 9% range is a bit of a mix of everything. We raise a bit of everything and call with a bit of everything. So there isn't a single hand class that is always a raise. But then, versus the aggressive player with 26% range, here are few things that we can pick up. It's as blocker, not it's ace of spades. So the board was 7-7-4 with 2 spades. So the ace of spade blocker, and this means just the ace of spades, not 2 spades. So we don't have the nut flush draw, it's just the blocker. Versus Aggro, we actually check raise just the blocker 30% of times, which is really high frequency. And normally, it's raised only 3% of times. So, huge difference here. So it's definitely a check raise fold. So if you're wondering what is our raise folding range as a pure bluff, Sommer likes to raise ace of spades. Whether this is good strategy or not, I'm not sure, because Sommer plays the ace blocker like he would play the flush draw. So it gives a lot of pressure to opponent if the flush comes there. And Sommer folds to that aggression and pressure more than people fold on small stakes. Like if the opponent calls with flush draw, he's never folding his flush. So my advice is don't raise the naked ace of spades that often. Still might do it every now and then, but it's not as powerful in real life as it is in Sommer strategies, because people don't fold flushes. Then the ace of spade blocker without anything, like without 4 bluffs, which means 4 and all the pocket pairs of 5-5 better. So all the pocket pairs, 4 as a blocker, or 5-6 for open-ender. So just the naked ace of spades blocker is raised only 12% of times. And then it mostly has the cut shot. So we can see that ace of spades with something is raised way more often. Blocker of 4, any pocket pair to give a couple of extra outs. And then the ace of spades without anything, just the naked blocker, is raised 12% of times. So still every now and then. Interesting thing is that overpairs are raised for protection. Pocket 8 is raised 44% of times. And it doesn't matter whether you have the flush draw or not, there's no pattern. It still raises around 44%. For nines, it goes down to 33. It has a bit more showdown value, so it's raised a bit less often. And then the pattern comes down, and pocket 10 is like 20%. It's approximation 10s, jacks, queens, kings. Then all of those have around 20. It goes from 17 to 23 or something, but it's there around 20s for the Broadway pair. So you can see that the lower the pocket pair is, the more solver raises it for protection. Then if we have the nut flush draw, that's raised 55% of times, and all other flush draws around 25. Once again, goes from 22 to 27 depending how high it is and so on. But you can see a clear difference that nut flush draw is raised quite often, and other flush draws are often just a call. Then in the normal 9% range that we raise, then 7 plus, which means trips and full houses and quads, it's raised only 23% of times. So you can see that a lot of slow playing on that board with trips or better. But versus Aggro, we don't want to slow play. We raise 6%, so almost 2 out of 3 times we raise when we have trips or better. And very interesting hand is the exact hand of Jack 10 9 8 with the flush draw. Normally this is never a raise, but versus aggressive, this hand that has 4 overs and a lot of backdoor straight draw runouts, or backdoor straight runouts, then it's raised 81%. If we change the hand in any way, add a cap or remove one of those cards, the frequency goes down a lot. But the exact hand of Jack 10 9 8 with spades is raised 81% of times, which was very interesting to find that exact hand combination. There's that much big of a difference. Then naked 5-6. Now this monster syntax means that 5-6, an exclamation mark removes something. So 5-6 without the spade and without the 7 or 4. So without any trips or full house blockers. Then naked open-ender with 5-6 is raised 38% of times, and normally only 8%. So there's a huge difference. One of those hands, if you're wondering, okay, if the opponent is aggressive, what are the hands that I add to my raising range that normally aren't there? Not talking about frequencies, but are there exact hands? Now there's a couple of those exact hands that you can start to bluff raise versus aggressives. All right. We're going forward, and there's a lot of information, so feel free to pause the video, go back, think about them. I'm going to compare these ranges to the other situation in the end, but in this kind of video where there's constant feed of information, there's those pie graphs, information and everything, it would be hard to consume and process everything on one go when you just watch the video. So feel free to pause, make notes, go back, think a little. We move on the video. Middle position versus button. So MP opens, button calls, we are on the button. Flop is 774, and middle position cbets half a pot. Pretty common spot. Solver strategy says that he should cbet around 23% of times. So not much cbetting. Not much cbetting here. Now, if we compare, let me just find it. If we compare this to how often the solver wants to cbet when it's in position versus uncapped checking range, it was 35. And if the opponent has a leading range from the big blind, then it would be around 40-45%. So huge difference from normal of 35 to 45% cbetting frequency. Now out of position goes down to 23 only. And then when we are on the button and we face that cbet, we're going to raise 60% of times, defending around 65%, 64 overall. So raising 16, a lot more raising when we are in position. Previously it was only 9% wider c-betting range. Now the c-betting range is a bit narrower and we raise 16%. But we are interested when the opponent is c-betting 80%. And now when middle position action is 80% of times betting half a pot, how do we react? How do we change from that raise 9, call 49? We raise 36 and call 38. So now the overall defending frequency goes up a lot. Now in the previous situation when we were out of position, our overall defending frequency went up only 5%. From 65 to 70, or what was it? But now, normally we would fold 42%. Now we fold only 26. So there's a huge difference when we are in position. We're going to call with more and more marginal hands. And we're raising whooping 36% of times, and that's a big ass raising frequency. So out of position it was 26. When our range is not capped, we check our whole range. Now in position we raise a lot more and put a lot of pressure on the aggressive player. Now of course you have to remember that when solver bets, even when he bets 80%, when we raise, he tries to find the optimal way to play that situation. I actually forgot my camera. Here I am. Someone didn't put it on. So if you wondered where I've been on this video, here I am. And the hologram started to work right now. But yeah, not going to start over. Let's continue. So the solver is c-betting 80%, and then we raise 36. Normal aggressive player would overcall, overraise, overplay a lot of his hands. Solver is not. So this is not the absolute optimal strategy to play versus aggressive players, because the aggressive player is not playing with balance like solver is trying to do. So it's just the guideline of how solver fights back versus balance, versus aggression with balance strategies. And you can use it as a guideline, you can use it as a starting point. And if you face tough opponents, let's say, who just over c-bet paired boards, like Kudurek has done solver strategy, tries to exploit you by c-betting a lot on 7/7/4s, then we can use this strategy because then when we raise, he's not going bananas with everything. He tries to make good plus EV decisions. He just puts himself in a bad, nasty situation by c-betting too much. Alright. But at 36% range, let's start to see what the hell does that range contain. So, versus aggressive, our 36% range, the naked ace of spades blocker is now raised 31, normally only 6%. And now if you try to remember what was the raising percentage in the previous situation when we were out of position, don't worry, I will compare these two side by side in a bit. But yeah, 1 out of 3 times the ace of blocker is raised. And even without anything, it's still raised 28% of times. And mostly it has a cut shot then. But it doesn't have 4 blocker, it doesn't have 5/6. So, ace blocker with the cut shot or better, raised 1 out of 3 times. Now, pocket pairs, more protection. Almost half of the times, just all the pocket 8s are raised. And that's something that often doesn't cross people's mind. Like, we have pocket 8s and flop is 7/7/4, opponent c-bets. We're like, we don't know what to do, and if we raise and he calls these overcards, has a lot of equity, and we might end up folding. The thing is, if we raise, we have a lot of fold equity, and we protect our hand versus those overcards. Because opponents should fold overcards. Pocket 9s, you can see that the frequency goes down, and pocket 10s, pocket pairs around 30, plus minus few percent. So same pattern. as in previous situation. And not flush draw raised 55% of times, other flush draws 36, slightly more than previously. So everything is slightly more. And then normal 16% raising range versus normal opponent, the trips or better is raised 40%. So a lot more raising in position with trips. And versus aggressive, it's almost 70%. So slow playing some, value betting most. And now the interesting Jack 10 9-8 with the spade draw, it's raised 63% of times. Normally only 6%. So now in position it becomes a raise even in normal balance strategy. Out of position it wasn't. In position it is. And versus aggressive even more. And then the naked 5-6 without anything is raised 60% of times and normally 31. So let's compare these two situations, in position, out of position. A lot of information. We could compare all kinds of stuff here, but I will do this comparison so you will see what's the difference. When we are on the big blind and the button cbets 80%, our raising range is 26. Ace of spade blocker is raised 30%, normally under 3%. So normally it's not even a raise. We don't bluff with just the ace of spades. Versus Aggro, we do. And without anything good, then only 12%. That's pretty much with the cut shots. We raise it. And we protect pocket pairs. And the lower the pocket pair is, the more often we want to raise it as a protection. That's pretty good takeaway from here. And then the nut flush draw 55, no other flush draws around 25. And then button versus middle position, when we are in position, the raising range is 36%. And the same categories here, we can see that naked ace blocker, not the difference, but when we have naked ace with just the cut shot, that's what we raise a bit more. And then pocket pairs, 44 to 47, 33 to 36. Those are quite the same. I mean, no one will have exact 44% or no's. So you don't have to be perfect. But the general idea that the lower our overpair is, the more we need to protect it. Versus aggressive players, more we want to raise it. And then Broadway pairs are raised a bit more in position. Because in position makes your life easier. And then with the nut flush draw, raising 55, we can see that normally in position we raise a bit more with the flush draws. And then the last parts of the raising range, trips or better, normally raised 23% versus aggressive. This is the out of position situation. Versus aggressive, 60%. And the interesting Jack 10 9-8 with spades, 81%. So almost always a raise with that exact hand. And then the naked 5-6, 38%. And here's when we are in position, same thing. Normally trips or better is raised quite a lot more often. And versus Aggro, we just raise it a bit more often. And the Jack 10 9-8 6 is interesting. Now it's only 63% range. So in position we call with Jack 10 9-8 a bit more often. And then naked 5-6 we raise 59% of times, slightly more often. So out of the video, some patterns how solver likes to attack the aggressive player. Now, in real life, your average aggressive player is far from being balanced. So any notes you have, any information how wide he stacks off, like if he stacks off with almost anything, then you don't want to bluff him that much. You just want to value bet more. So we want to raise overpairs way more often and raise ace blockers way more or less, and raise 5-6 way more or less. If you call an opponent is always barreling turns and rivers when you show weakness, we don't never want to raise trips. We always call to give him room to bluff the turns and rivers. Like here, solver raises in position trips or better almost 70% of times, but if opponent is very aggressive on turns and rivers, we might want to make a check. Just call, and then call turn, and then shove the river. So, this is not how you must play versus aggressive players. It's one strategy versus certain aggressive player. But it's interesting to see how solver approach aggression, because then when you face good thinking aggressive players, like players who are trying to play profitable poker, they understand the concepts, they understand what EV is, they want to play plus EV poker, they just want to be aggressive, they think the aggression generates the money. Then versus those players, it's a lot harder to play, because they are not trying to do anything totally stupid, they just want to use aggression to exploit you. So you have to counter that with certain strategies, and that's what this video is more about. If your opponent is total monkey, just being aggressive because it's fun, he might be drunk, just having fun, doesn't care about equities, gets it in with cut shots because he feels like so, tries to make stupid bluffs in stupid situations because he just loves to bluff, then versus those players you need different strategy. And then it's always individual situation. Every maniac has own tendencies, own frequencies, and make notes, pay attention how he plays, figure out how wide he is. Like, there's a video on this YouTube channel where I show how to figure out value betting range versus coin station with PokerChoose. You can use the software of PokerChoose to figure out how wide should be value raise versus aggression, and so on and so on. It's a bit more complicated, but you can use PokerChoose to figure out the thresholds versus certain types of aggressive players. And the more you do it, the more you have the general feeling of how to play versus different types of players. And then you can print money. But I hope you like this theoretical video where we do exploitation simulations. Like normal solver sims are all about balance. I love doing simulations where we force certain frequencies to see how solver changes and then compare normal strategy to this forced frequency counter strategy and see how solver approaches. And this video was good to show how solver approaches the situation if opponent is c-betting way more than he should be. Hope you enjoyed. Lots of information. Don't feel ashamed to go back, make notes. And if you have any questions or you think I missed some portions of these ranges, then like we didn't talk about wraps, just opening there. So if you want to know more, feel free to drop a message on the Discord. Happy to show you. I have the sims saved, so we can go back to this whenever we want. I hope you enjoyed this half an hour. I had a fun time, although the hologram didn't work in the beginning, but at least it's now here. Have a safe journey through the galaxy. I will see you on the next video.